My friend and I and our two girlfriends decided to try angel trumpet after learning that my friend had an enormous angel trumpet tree in his backyard, and that it apparently could have hallucinogenic properties. We boiled 5 pink flowers in about 2 gallons of water with tea leaves. We also took the green base leaves of the flowers and some of the stems and microwaved them to dry them out. We decided to go to the beach. We smoked about 2 grams of the microwave plant before we left. I remember it making me see strange colors for a moment but nothing else. Afterwards, my friend immediately started drinking tea. He probably ingested about 1,000 milliliters of tea before we arrived. Our girlfriends each probably drank about 350 to 500 milliliters. I waited till we arrived before I ingested about 500 milliliters of the tea. By the time we arrived, my friend was beginning to act very strange. We had stopped by another friend's house a few minutes before to see if he was at home. His mom met us in the driveway and said that he was out. As I started to back out of the driveway, my friend began to step out of the car. When I asked him where he was going, he said, "I left me weed and my pipe in the house." I responded, "We never even got out of the car, bro. We've only been here for about 45 seconds, now we're going to the beach. Remember?" He looked at me frustrated, but shut the door and we drove on. Would note, driving while intoxicated, tripping, or extremely sleep deprived is dangerous and irresponsible because it endangers other people. Don't do it. Once we got there, my friend said he had to pee. He went into the bathroom, which was a bathroom for one with a door. About 6 seconds later he came back out, looking angry and confused. I asked, "You good? Single stage fright?" He nodded and started walking to the beach. Once we got down to the water, his girlfriend disappeared. We thought we could see her in the distance and for some reason we were all okay with this. My girlfriend sat with our stuff. I turned to ask my friend what he wanted to do now and he was gone. A few minutes later he came walking up with his arm hanging in the air. He told me he just met this guy and that apparently, he had some good ecstasy. There was no guy. When I asked him what the fuck he was talking about, he looked around and said, "The fuck did that guy go?" Suddenly, I felt strange. Like everything was supposed to be normal, but I was somehow in the wrong place. I started to walk down the beach a little bit, and without warning, the entire right side of my body shut off. My arm, leg, even my eyes suddenly went limp, sending me crashing to the sand. I stood up very confused, having no idea why I'd just fallen. As I continued walking, this phenomena happened again and again, each time sending me to the sand. At this point I decided I should round everyone up and get the hell out of there before someone noticed our strange behavior. Meanwhile, my friend's girlfriend, whom we had lost about half an hour earlier, returns, and plops down next to my girlfriend, both of which are in deep conversations with absolutely no one at all. They're not talking to each other, they're talking to thin air. What I did not know, was that my friend's girlfriend had been wandering for the last half hour from one woman's purse on the beach to the next, rummaging through them. Each time she was confronted by the owner of the purse, she told them she was looking for her cell phone. When the owner explained she was looking through the wrong purse, she simply agreed and went to the very next purse she saw. She did this to 5 or so people. Needless to say, the cops have now been called. Now I've got the 2 ladies, but my friend is gone again. As I'm looking around, I see him up the beach hiding behind tall grass. When I approached him, he was crouching down, eating a long blade of grass with one hand, smoking a cigarette that wasn't there with the other, with fire ants all over his feet. When I asked him what the fuck he was doing, he looked at me but didn't respond. I started to walk him back down to the water to wash the fire ants off his feet. Unfortunately, neither one of us could walk properly, and we kept falling down. Once I finally got the 3 of them collected with our stuff, got my girlfriend up and we went to go pull the car around. When I got to the car, the police arrived. By now I was tripping hard. I was really confused as to why the cop wanted to talk to me. I was talking to another friend who was with me, but he wasn't really there. Me, my girlfriend, and my friend's girlfriend were arrested. The girls were taken to the hospital to be observed for a while, and several hours later, were taken to jail. I was taken directly to jail. While in the back of the police car they picked up another inmate to take to the jail. We laughed and joked about how stupid the cop driving was and how horrible his driving skills were. Shortly before we arrived at the jail, I was distracted. When I looked over, the inmate that had now become my friend was gone. He was never there in the first place. The officer driving kept a constant crazy-eyed look on me the rest of the trip. One thing I had not read about when it came to this drug was the power. It was like really warm blood pumping through your veins, up to your brain, down to your feet, and back again. It wasn't like anything felt lighter, or I felt stronger. It just felt like, If I applied the force for long enough, whatever I was trying to force, got forced. The police could not figure out what I was on, and although I was acting extremely weird, I wasn't being violent or angry. But I wouldn't stand still. Every chance I got I wandered away. This happened 3 times somehow. They finally handcuffed me to a chain link fence that was protecting the glass of one of the police station rooms. I decided I didn't want to be there anymore, and started to leave again. Realizing I was handcuffed to something this time, I decided I would need to take the wall with me. I slowly began to walk forward, pulling harder and harder on the fence. As I stepped forward, the fence began to bend. I felt the force of the fence pulling on me, but I just kept the same slow pace walking forward. It didn't feel like the forced holding was increasing. Just that it was constant, and it just wasn't enough to keep me from continuing my slow walk. Then, snap! The brackets on the edge of the fence buckled and broke. I ripped the side of the fence off the glass. It didn't even feel like it took any effort. This made a lot of noise and quickly attracted police attention. I was subdued, and taken to a cell. The rest of the night people kept coming to visit me at my cell that weren't there. Every once in a while an officer would check on me and try to get me to tell them what I was on. To which I kept replying, "Weed man. Just weed." When I was finally bailed out I couldn't read anything. I could see the letters, but just couldn't get them to form words. It took another day to sober up completely. The after effects were mostly related to being unable to read. My friend, however, had consumed considerably more Brugmansia than us. My friend had also been recently discharged from the Marines for injury. He was a pretty big guy. While the cops were handling us 3 at the beach, a group of officers had showed up on scene to get my friend. He was now completely naked, halfway in the water, stating that he had to go to Walmart and walking out into the ocean. Somehow the police convinced him to come back to the shore, where they promptly handcuffed him and tried to arrest him. He jumped up, freaked out, and actually snapped the handcuffs. Yes, that's right, he physically broke the chain connecting the 2 cuffs with raw strength. At that point the cops beat the shit out of him with nightsticks till he stopped moving. They sent him to the infirmary. Eventually he went to jail. The sergeant on the scene said it was the first set of handcuffs he'd seen broken in 20 years. When he got home we came and visited him. He seemed fine. Bruised and battered, but coherent. He functioned normally in society for 2 days. On the 3rd, he called me in a panic. He had no memory of anything that had happened after we took the tea, and didn't understand why he had so many bruises, why his wrists were so torn up, or what had happened to the last 3 days. He functioned for 2 days before he came to. We were shocked.
I took Angel's trumpet 2 times. I was living in Central Florida, where pretty many people have them growing in their yards. The first time was back in 2000. I actually was at school, I was 15 at the time, at a Saturday school for getting in trouble. I had just moved to the area a few months earlier, and someone I had met but didn't know well and went by the nickname of Enoch had a cup of coffee with him before we had to go in to do our time, lol. He handed me some and after I had taken a few sips told me there were Angel's trumpets in it. As I was from a northern state originally I had never heard of this tropical plant. I thought he was playing a joke on me, so I drank more to make sure there was no strange taste and to prove I didn't believe him. We went into the school and I remember the first effects I realized was I was doing some homework and the words on the page started spinning around, and after that I don't remember much. Only little bits and pieces. There was a police officer there, as is the way they always have it during such activities. I was told I patted him on the head like a dog when he took me outside to talk with me. I remember I couldn't speak, which I have found out now is probably from the side effect of dehydration. My throat was probably restricted or something. My grandmother had to come get me and she took me mistakenly to her work first, which was a medical center. They told her she had to take me to the hospital immediately. I remember once I was at the hospital they tried putting a catheter in and an I-5 and one flipped out and they had to put me in 4 points to get the IV in. I remember smoking cigarettes that kept vanishing. I remember talking to someone, I don't remember who it was, for a long time and they too vanished. The first time wasn't really all that great at all, it was just confusing and I really disliked it as I wasn't ready for it. Though I don't think you ever can be, as they say, you really don't believe you're hallucinating. You really believe it's all real. I was no stranger to drugs, I had done my share of acid, shrooms, heroin, weed, coke, etc. Nothing got me ready for the angel's trumpet. The hospital had said I was very lucky to not die as my heart was beating so fast, and I guess they said I was allergic to it. I don't believe that now that I've read everything I've read. They just don't know much about it even at the hospital. I believe the guy who gave it to me had done it smart, like on the one post, how you should build up your tolerance, as he said afterward that he did it all the time and he never went to the hospital. The second time was very different. We were already rolling on ecstasy when me, my BF at the time and our other friend decided to go and find an angel trumpet bush. We didn't make it into a tea at all, we just ate the leaves, putting rolls in them and chewing and swallowing real quick. To this day I hate salad. The first thing I noticed that time was all the plants starting to take a purple color and get all furry. I knew I was in for it. That night has haunted me for the past 6 years. Even though I have a husband and 2 daughters, I'm still freaked out by it. I don't know why it affected me so badly, but it was more than just a trip, I feel like. I really think I left my body, I was flying above the world. We went out to a shroom field, a cow field, where we usually picked our shrooms. We had all laid down in the middle of the road and looked up at the sky. I was flying and I remember also looking out into the field and seeing 2 young blonde-haired girls waving at me to come back. I think I was out of my body because I was dying. And the funny thing is, that years later I had my daughters who looked just like the 2 girls. I have dissociated before on just ecstasy, a lot of it, and I really believe that when that happens I'm leaving my body because I'm almost dead. I don't remember all that much from that time period, but as dawn approached, one of the people that lived near the field called the police as they saw us wandering around so oddly. I was naked, which still bothers me to know to this day. The police came and the ambulance, they kept just saying we were incoherent. My BF at the time was okay enough to walk home, yet me and the other friend had to be taken to the hospital. When I was in the hospital, I did the whole smoking non-existent cigarettes thing again. I had also been bitten all over by fire ants, they literally feel like fire. And ever since that night, anytime I get bit by one I feel very strange, almost like a flashback type thing. But anyway, so the cops probably felt bad for me that time as they didn't charge us with anything. I think I forgot to tell you I got charged with ingestion of harmful chemicals the first time I took them. That was bullshit. Anyway, I don't know why it affected me so greatly. I really believe it's called angel's trumpet because an angel is trumpeting for my death. I know I've read now that many people can take them and be fine, and I'm happy for them because it's the trip of a lifetime, if you live. I sometimes still wonder what it would be like if I could do it and not suffer in the hospital and getting poked with needles and all. If I could do it with a sitter, as people recommend, and if I still even did drugs and didn't have a family, I would consider it. There's something so spiritual, yet in a way so evil, about the entire experience. I'll let you know, the way I always looked at it was like a Garden of Eden type situation. What was odd was the people I was with that night were named Adam and Lucas, i.e., Adam, Eve, and Lucifer in the forbidden fruit of knowledge of good and evil. But I think if you're willing to open your eyes to some very strange things, to knowledge that we may not want to have, as I really don't believe I will ever be the same, then go for it and partake of these plants. One of my psychiatrists told me one time that when you do angel's trumpet, the poison actually blacks out a part of your brain, like kills it. I don't know how true that is, and I know I've done so many other drugs that could have affected my brain as well. But I still have dreams of that twilight time during which I was tripping out in the field. I always wake up with such a strange feeling. I really like the way other people worded it on the one site, how it is like a dream you're awake in, how it's a mixture of your conscious and unconscious coming together unlike any other type of hallucinogen can do. I really don't believe it is something the younger generation should just mess with as some way to get high. It has more meaning than that. I was stupid too. There are some things that are above us, more than us. I don't believe it's the plant necessarily, but what it can invoke within us. Thanks for letting me share my story. Hope it is of some help. I also find it very intriguing how it seems to be an ongoing phenomena with the Brugmansia and Datura, that everyone has tons of imaginary people around them. I don't know if that shows the need in us as a species to be social, especially during a time when our bodies are fighting off a poison that could possibly kill us. I remember quite well people in the hospital being there, then disappearing, and people that weren't really there I'd have conversations with for so long. The cigarette phenomena is pretty interesting too. Everyone seems to have the same experience of smoking imaginary cigarettes the whole time. It's so very frustrating when you keep dropping and not being able to find or pick up these hallucinations too. Maybe it symbolizes that what we're looking for in these trips isn't attainable through this way of trying to get to ourselves. The only way to truly understand yourself in the world and experience it for all it's worth, I believe, is through true experience, daily life and introspection of yourself, not the lies of drugs and other forbidden fruit. As others have written in, I don't recommend this drug to anyone. Whatever it is you're trying to find, you can find without it within yourself and this world. Don't die trying to find life.
Every report I read about Datura ends in tears. Mine is no different, but I do have a strong urge to use it again, and did not find my experience overly unpleasant. Unfortunately, my friends and family didn't have the same sense of euphoria upon realizing that I had become, in essence, a complete raving loony. Since childhood I have had a fascination with psychedelic substances. The idea of being in an entirely different world, apparent only in my own head, excites me greatly. After taking numerous acid tabs, eating many shrooms and taking ecstasy pills in extremely high doses, I decided it was time to take it to the next level, Datura. After a little research and a few months of keeping my eyes peeled for the telltale signs of this incredible deliriant, I discovered a Brugmansia tree, commonly known as tree Datura, growing out the front of a house a few suburbs away from home. I sneakily picked a number of flowers, and, full of excitement and elation, took them home for use. My father asked me what I was doing with 5 big flowers, since I had never been overly interested in any plant that doesn't get you high, and my response that they simply smelled very nice was accepted, but not without suspicion. My experience starts at about 8:30 p.m. when I was preparing for a night at a friend's house, we'll call her Cindy, where we were to be watching a movie or two then going to bed. I consider Cindy to be one of my closest friends. We live quite nearby and often sleep at each other's houses, generally sharing a bed. On arrival at Cindy's house I discovered that I needed to return home to fetch something I had forgotten. When I walked through my front door the sweet scent hit me, called out to me, enticed me closer, then sucked me right in. I'll quickly make a tea, and head back to Cindy's house for a crazy movie experience is what I told myself. 3 flowers went into the tea. Note, when I say flowers, I am also including the 3 inches or so of stem that connects the flower to the branch. I had chopped all the plant matter into pieces as small as I could with a pair of scissors, using the same process you might use to chop wheat. I put the chopped flowers into a large coffee mug, adding boiling water to the brim. Stirred intensely for about 2 minutes, then strained the mixture into a separate coffee mug, using a coffee filter, the type you would use in a percolator, and added a tablespoon of sugar. I allowed this to cool in the freezer for about 2 minutes, chucked in some ice, not the type you smoke, and gulped it down as quick as I could. I would not describe the taste as pleasant, but it is quite bearable. My tip is to drink it fast, get it over with quickly, like shooting tequila. It was a short drive back to Cindy's house, and on arrival my excitement showed as I heartily announced that I had consumed Datura tea. Now, while Cindy is no stranger to the drug scene, she had never heard of Datura until that day, and really had no idea what I, or she for that matter, was in for. And now I think of it, neither did I. You will notice that I am not publishing what time things may have happened to me. The reason for this is that my perception of time, and reality in general, were not quite realistic. We decided that we would watch the movie, Revenge of the Nerds, in Cindy's bedroom. Before I go any further, I should note that Cindy is a boarder. She lives with a family that simply saw a chance to make some extra cash renting a room to her in their house. After lying down in her bed to watch the movie, things started to get a bit strange. I found it very difficult to focus on the television, and the characters were speaking complete nonsense. At some point the movie finished and I needed to go to the toilet. I vaguely remember that the time was after midnight and everyone except us was asleep. On my way to the bathroom I ran into the television, a desk, a few walls, and I kicked my shin on the toilet bowl. All this was done very noisily, in my head at least, and I remember feeling bad that I might wake everyone up, but it didn't stop me from repeating this process at least 3 times. I felt as if I was thinking completely clearly, as though I had simply lost my depth perception and clarity of vision. I believe that they were the only effects I was experiencing for most of the trip. It wasn't until later that I discovered that there were much greater effects at play. After talking to Cindy for a while, I noticed her getting angry, but for the life of me couldn't figure out what I was saying that was so bad, nor do I remember what I was saying. Eventually Cindy snapped and drove me home, where she loaded me up with Seroquel, an antipsychotic, antidepressant with strong sedative qualities, and put me to bed. I have no memory of this. After having conversations with a few people that weren't there, and still believing that I was acting completely normally, I woke my father up, who had to leave for work at 4 a.m. and was extremely annoyed to be woken. Dad asked me a few questions to which I gave completely logical responses, but he just stared back at me confused, asking things like "What the hell is wrong with you? What are you on?" and making statements like "You are making no sense whatsoever." Naturally these responses baffled me, as I was making complete sense. Dad must have been on something. After the third time I had woken him, my father coaxed out of me the fact that I had used Datura. Sleeping was extremely difficult due to the driest mouth I have ever experienced, which was tough to deal with, and I woke myself up numerous times with violent twitches and loud exclamations that were forgotten as quickly as they arrived. Then I woke up, feeling fairly close to normal with only the mildest of hangover symptoms. Overall I had really enjoyed my experience. My memories are of extreme euphoria and a couple of odd events such as smoking non-existent cigarettes, and talking to people who later turned out not to exist. I must stress that even on discovering that I was talking to someone that wasn't there, I still believed that my brain was functioning perfectly normally. I called Cindy to find out a little more about my night, not expecting to hear a lot, as I believed that I could remember most things. When she answered, I was in for a rude shock, her first words being, "Don't you ever take that shit around me again. Do you have any idea the kind of hell you put me through last night? I've probably lost my job and my room and it's entirely your fault." Fuck, not what I expected. My obvious reply, "What did I do?" For such a short question I received an extremely long and painful answer. "You pissed on my bedroom wall, my hallway wall, the bathroom wall, your pants, and just about anything else you could get your penis close to. You then proceeded to lay in my landlord's bed, wet pants and all, got bored with that, went into the bathroom and ran a hot shower, never got in it, the water ran cold, moved back over to the toilet and attempted to shove multiple rolls of toilet paper down this bend, then sat in the bath talking gibberish to no one in particular. You were convinced that light is actually a form of sound that had rewired itself into our hands, and if you know how to drink it properly you'll turn blue." She backed up this statement with a recording. It was undeniably my voice. This is when I started to realize that this really wasn't a joke, and that my memory of the night's adventures and activities was completely unreliable. I had heard enough from Cindy, and felt sufficiently ashamed with my actions to shed a tear. I didn't call my father, scared of the response I would receive. My phone rang. "Jack, a good mate." "Hey Jack. How's things? Thanks for calling this morning at 1 a.m., 2:30 and 3 o'clock. I only answered the first time. You're an effing idiot. What's this shit you were carrying on about? Something about lasers and confragulations. What the hell is a confragulation?" I simply apologized, explained what I had taken, and hung up the phone, feeling even worse. Eventually I had to face the music and go home. Dad didn't say much aside from, "If you do anything like this again, you're out for good." The horrible feeling in my gut intensifying further. The worst side effect of this drug is the embarrassment and shame I felt when told of my actions on the drug. Not too different from an alcohol blackout, but undeniably worse. The moral of the story? Most of the undesirable side effects of Datura were suffered not by me using the drug, but by the people around me. My advice when using Datura is as follows. 1. Avoid leaving the house you are in, as you will be guaranteed to embarrass yourself, extremely likely to hurt yourself, and you would probably end up in a psych ward or in jail. 2. Tell someone who has an understanding of the drug, exactly what you are doing, and ask them to be a sitter for you, strongly recommended. 3. Be aware that each flower and each plant has a different toxicity level, experiment with small doses first. This last tip is not essential, but may be fun. Place a video camera somewhere in the room you are in, choosing carefully a place that would be difficult to access, so as not to break the camera during the course of the trip. Or preferably have the camera manned by your sitter. I am yet to do this, but I assume that the video you watch in the morning will be very different from the night you remember. I have had a few personal experiences with moonflowers. I took 10 white flowers, a dose way above the recommended, boiled them in 200 milliliters water and added 100 milliliters milk afterwards. This was at about 7 p.m. The first, approximate, hour was all waiting, but somewhere in the following hour I became extremely incoherent. The last thing I remember was shading my eyes from the brightness of the street lights. Apparently, I had run into the road and was duly run over. The night in hospital was hell, for everyone else that is. I had become a madman, security having to hold me down. I had almost lost my life in the crash, yet I was oblivious of any pain or discomfort. The next morning the hallucinations were still running rife. I smoked imaginary cigarettes that would constantly fall out of my fingers or disintegrate into sand. I couldn't recognize my own mother and my mind had somehow convinced itself that I was at home in my bed and everybody in the room was just strangers in my room, even though I couldn't remember where the sores on my ankles and head had come from. I only became fully coherent at about 8 p.m. the night after I had consumed the flowers. Strangest thing was that I couldn't read for about 3 days, the letters were just one huge blur. The problem with this stuff is that there is no way in which one could tell the difference between a hallucination and reality. Now you might say that I took way too much, but then again this wasn't the last trip I experienced. After hearing about my experience, a friend who had thought my story was very funny, declared that he also wanted to experience this trip. Knowing that I had taken way too much last time, I prepared a much softer batch. I took 3 flowers, some hot water and just softly pulped the flowers for about a minute. I then rewarmed this and made coffee out the concoction. He drank it at approximately 8 p.m. My friend spent his entire trip at my house, luckily for him. I never expected him to become so tripped out. At first he seemed fine, for the first 35 minutes. He went to the bathroom and didn't come out. 20 minutes later his brother and I went into the bathroom and found him lying inside the bath. He couldn't walk, couldn't speak, although he constantly seemed to mumble things, but I could see in his face that his mind was working overtime. The hallucinations were too strong for him to handle. He wet himself twice that night, and did not sleep for 1 second. The trouble came in the morning though, because by now his body had come to. He was able to walk, but his speech was still impaired, and yet the hallucinations were still running his mind completely. He knocked things over everywhere and was having a hectic conversation with my mother, who couldn't understand a word. He kept on speaking about horses standing in my garden and wanted to open the doors. This was at about 8 a.m., about 2 hours later, when the hallucinations began to calm down and his ability to speak had fully returned. I began to experiment on how his cognitive mind was working. Well, it wasn't. Simple math sums, like 1 plus 1 and 500 plus 5, posed a huge problem to him. His inability to tell me his own or mine or his brother's or his father's names also really bothered me. This, unfortunately, was not the last time the drug was used by a friend. I've had a few more who fell victim to their use of this plant, and each and every one of them ended up in hospital or jail. One of my friends got lost in a large stretch of veldt not too far from his house and spent almost the entire weekend falling around in the veldt. The latest fool wasn't so lucky. It does not seem as if his mind will fully recover from the trip. He resides in an institution until his mind recovers, if it does. I say fool because this was a friend who knew what had happened to everybody else, only bad experiences, but still took the chance and he, well, paid the price. I'm submitting this as a warning to others. Please don't mess around with plants or any other substances you know nothing about. Just because it's natural does not mean it won't screw you up or kill you. Most of the alkaloids in plants are natural defense mechanisms against plant feeders, so they are poisonous. I am not saying don't ever try anything at all, but you have to know what you are getting yourself into, if you care about your life and your mental health. It was a normal summer day. I was riding my bike to my friend's house and rode by the apartment complex a couple blocks from my street. I noticed a young yellow-flowered Brugmansia in front of the apartment nearest the street. I was ecstatic. I've read reports and always wanted to try a dissociative. Would note, Brugmansia can cause dissociation, but is classified as a deliriant, not a dissociative, so I plucked a flower and continued the ride to my buds. I got there and he asked why I had the flower. I told him it was a powerful drug. Of course he didn't believe me. He probably thought I was going to coax him into eating some shitty tasting plant for kicks, so I took him to a computer, and showed him the experiences. He was still skeptical and wouldn't eat it, so I munched on it for about 15 minutes. I had eaten about half of the flower by the time I left, and wasn't feeling any effects. The taste was moderately bitter, but definitely not comparable to Yahe brews I have tried. On my way home I figured I would pluck a leaf and see if it would kick it in, and believe you me, it did. As soon as I got home I made some green tea, and added some honey to chase the bitterness. I consumed the entire leaf within 3 minutes, and then I pulled out the rest of the flower and chomped it in one bite. D plus 30 minutes. I don't remember if the onset was sudden, but it was definitely present. I was upstairs in the bonus room doing my work online, trying. It seemed about 10 minutes after I sat in the chair, I had to scoot back to read the keys. I stood up and felt completely wasted. I told my mother I wasn't feeling well and went to my closet. I have a 55 square foot closet, and I sleep in there. I lied down and tried to sleep, but the CEV swirling patterns were too bold to rest at all. I would say I spent at least 30 minutes in my closet. D plus 1 hour 20 minutes. I opened the door to my closet, and looked to the dark side of the moon poster on my wall. The entire poster was shimmering in glittery blues, greens, and pinks. I was astonished. I had experienced such a real OEV in my life, although there are much more astounding hallucinations to come. I went into the bonus room where my mom was on the computer, and sat on the couch. I started talking about completely random things, and she asked me what I had taken. I told her about 6 different times I had eaten different quantities and parts of the Brugmansia plant. But then I would start ranting about buying DXM from the grocery store, and how it was safe because it was the sole active ingredient in the brand I purchased. I remember her looking at me like I was stupid, and I also remember telling her about the DXM, but I remember it being relevant to the conversation, although obviously it wasn't. The next thing I remember is going into my room, and seeing the huge Colorado portrait leaned up against the wall. My father committed suicide 2 years ago. He was an avid skier and kayaker. I saw him descending the mountain on his kayak, floating on some sort of magic carpet made of water. I remember this was the first sight where the things in the picture actually started moving. D plus 2 hours and 20 minutes to 6 hours. I was delusional. I remember being in my closet for most of the trip. I sensed my friend's entities in the closet. I knew they were there, but they were hiding. The sleeping bags on the floor had beastly faces, but it was the wrinkles in the bags, and looked so real, not cartoonish or anything. I knew they were under the sleeping bags. I would pounce on one, look over and pounce on the next face. They were toying with me, continuing to make faces and hide under them, but slipping away before I could pounce. I became frustrated, but not violent. I crawled through my closet, searching through suitcases and clothes, when I finally realized the t-shirts were them. I went back to my mattress. Their t-shirts hanging next to me were part of them. They were connected and could hear me and see me. The shirts were a part of their body that they could sense from anywhere. I became embarrassed. I started talking to the shirts, explaining why I thought they were in the bags. It was like they were with me the whole time. It should be noted that I remembered eating the vegetation, but thought all of this was real and normal and didn't think me eating it had anything to do with what I was experiencing. I continued to talk to the extension of their senses for some time. And I would also feel them in the corner of my closet, and would start directing my speech towards there. When the talking became less frequent, I would have my cell phone in my hand, look down and see the blinding white screen, look up, look back down and feel the phone, not see the screen, then it would vanish, me feeling the sensation of it disappearing from my palm, the air rushing into the place where the phone had been, so real. I do smoke cigarettes, though I never experienced phantom smoking, the phantom phone taking its place. I talked to my father. I don't know what we said to each other, but I remember him sitting in front of me, laughing, and crying. My mother insists she lay in the closet with me for a couple hours, although I don't remember her being with me at all. D plus 6 hours to 13 hours. This was the segment of my trip out of the closet. I took a shower. There were dozens of tiny bubbles forming and popping around my feet from the shampoo. But the skin of the bubbles touching each other turned into skinny, stringy, stiff lines that would appear and grow as the bubbles formed, and quickly recede when they popped. There were tiny bugs, moving in the fashion of an ant trail, along all of the baseboards in the house. They stayed with me the rest of my trip. And so did the stiff crooked growing lines. They emitted from select objects, always the same ones, all of the time. I was told that I kept trying to shower and recall coming to a realization that I was naked in my bathroom, with my stepdad next to me saying put that thing away. I was dumbfounded and humiliated. How did I come to be nude? So it took me a minute to get some undergarments on. I attempted to brush my teeth. But seeing a person staring at you and copying your every move down to the exact moment was shocking and unexpected. It was me, but not in a mirror, it was another me, standing in front of me. I tried my best to outsmart him, but failed. My mother became worried because I wouldn't come down, and brought me to the ER. I was fine. I was cooperative, but random. The doctor would ask me questions and I would blurt something way out there. I remember him looking at me with a concerned and weirded out look on his face. I thought to myself, whoops, I said something stupid. Oh well, I'm embarrassed and awkward. I don't give a damn. I could not close my eyes. The nurse brought in a shot of Valium to calm me down. Fuck Valium. She shot me in my ass. I thought it was the H1N1 vaccine. I remember my butt hurting. Then nothing else until I was back from the hospital for some time. Valium did exactly the opposite of what was intended. D+ 21 to 35 hours. I was downstairs the rest of the trip. Everything was alive. Breathing. Nothing except the walls, furniture, and floor were inanimate. I was in the kitchen, sitting at the table next to the window. A fake blue flower in a vase 13 feet away on the counter was waving exactly like sea anemone, like it was happening, like for real. No light trail or halos or any of the ordinary. Just waving petals, no distortion. Every time I looked at it, it was doing the same thing. No matter what perspective I looked from, the light, nothing. It was motor operated. I was starting to come down, and was verbally abusing my mom. She said she called the police to calm me down. It made it worse. I was pissed. I asked her how she could do that to me. I was going to jail. In my mind. But it seemed as if she was joking. It was like when mom tells me I'm grounded for a week because I mouthed off to her, but I know she's bluffing, but still get upset because I need to trick her into thinking my gullible reaction is genuine. I couldn't tell how long it had been. The officer showed up, and it was the doctor from the ER. I knew it was him. In a policeman's uniform. I figured he took the role of authority figures. He was like Agent Smith in The Matrix, except this was a good guy. I remember swearing the cop a few times. Going out on the deck and looking at the stars. They were balls of fire, not little specks. And again it was real, no distortion. Sober eyes. My mother later told me I had 2 long conversations with the officer. I don't recall either. I just remember insulting him and giving him the finger as he walked out the door, probably because it's all I want to remember. I went back to the chair in the kitchen. 20 feet away, across the counter on the other side of the living room on a nightstand by the couch, was a Tupperware container filled with miniature fake pumpkins. They turned into a scarecrow, laying down, methodically and robotically waving his arms, legs, and moving his head. But very smoothly. He was bathing. I was walking the downstairs, I looked at the pictures on the refrigerator. If there was a person in it, they were moving or talking as they would be before the picture being snapped. And again, this was the only sight in the room at the time, no distortion, sober eyes, real. I remember seeing a translucent interactive buddy-looking character on the counter next to the blue flower. There was another a few inches from him, but he wasn't clearly visible. He shot him with a machine gun that shoots gray balls at a slow speed. I laughed. The last hallucination I remember is sitting on the Ottoman, or however it's spelled. That big thing you put your feet on. And the dotted colony was fading. They were becoming fewer, and some were trailing off course off of the baseboard and onto the wall. There were a few white spots on the ground close to the baseboard that were kind of moving. I wasn't positive if they were alive. I would pick one up and it would confusingly be inanimate and alive. I no longer cared. There was definitely a bug on the ground. A true bug, but on its back extracting its web and molding it with its legs. It would do this for a few seconds, then push the web my way, and inch from the ground it turned into white translucent granddaddy long legs. It took about 1.5 seconds to get to my face. I would dodge it and watch it float on to become stuck on the ceiling. It did this about a dozen times. And every so often a screen of translucent white dots would come flying along with the legs. It took extra effort to dodge this. Throughout the night, sights became fewer, until there was little movement of anything at all. I slept. I had not slept in 36 hours. I slept for only 14 hours. Woke up knowing what happening. Feeling completely normal, no tracers, not the slightest movement of anything. Like it never happened, and have felt so since. Throughout the entire experience there was no nausea or cramps at all. No side effects. It was insane. Be careful, dear friends. This has not been my first time experimenting with plants containing tropane alkaloids, But I will say that this was definitely my most notable experience with this type of plant, which happens to be my favorite out of the tropane plants. I am an 18-year-old male, 180 centimeters tall and 60 kilograms. Besides from Valium withdrawals, I have been in pretty good shape. I am a regular drinker and moderate cigarette smoker. I also take a multivitamin in the morning, and 10 to 20 milligrams of D-amphetamine sulfate per day for ADHD. I have experimented with many different substances over the years. I have smoked cannabis for 5 years and have recently cut down on my intake. I have also dabbled with speed, ice, ketamine, various pharmaceuticals, alcohol, and my favorites always being the tryptamines, LSD, mushrooms and DMT. Some other entheogens I have taken besides the tryptamines above are HBWR, mescaline, San Pedro, Salvia divinorum, and mild dabbling with datura and Brugmansia. A few nights previous to this encounter I prepared the herbs roughly in the same manner with the same quantities, except resulting in little activity. Perhaps the flower used this time was more potent than the last attempt, and the sedatives taken on that night had a role to play in the limited activity. It should be noted that my physical and mental state included withdrawals from taking diazepam in the evenings for 3 months or so and then stopping. The prompt for trying the dream mix once again was knowing that the last time I withdrew from diazepam, I got horrible and vivid nightmares which I have never experienced that intensely before. I could feel myself waking up frequently during the evenings, despite taking 50 milligrams of Seroquel to sedate me. I decided I wanted to experience some intense and hopefully prophetic dreams, but things ended up very differently indeed. This experience was void of any sedative medication, although some wine was consumed earlier in the evening and 10 milligrams of D-amphetamine sulfate in the afternoon. Growing gains respect. I have been raising this Brugmansia since it was only a young cutting, and this has been the first flowering. I place an important emphasis on raising these types of plants with great care and respect. An experience smoking Brugmansia leaf combined with cannabis a couple of years ago was quite powerful, but served as a warning sign. It wasn't ready to accept me. That experience by memory wasn't scary, more just like a sudden vision flashing with vicious intensity, and having a dominant orange color scheme in a jungle at night, illuminated by a large fire burning in the middle of a gathering. I saw a tribal following, with a lady on a throne. They appeared to be preparing for war, so I assumed she was presenting herself to me as a fast and vicious goddess of the jungle. I left the foliage on the young tree and raised it with care. Preparation. The basic ingredient ratios for the brew were about a third of a Brugmansia conjita flower combined with roughly 15 leaves of a Calea zacatachichi plant, both ingredients chopped finely. A pot with roughly 500 milliliters of was brought to a boil and the 2 herbs were added, and left to boil for another 20 to 30 minutes with 2 peppermint and 1 chamomile tea bags for flavoring. It was sweetened to taste, ice cubes were added until lukewarm, and it was all strained. Another third of the Brugmansia flower was rolled into a joint with about 5 to 10 chopped Calea leaves. After consumption of the tea I waited and relaxed for about 20 minutes before going and smoking the rest of the mixture in a small joint. Not long after that did I start to experience the first telltale tropane effect for me, being a strange taste in my mouth that lasts for at least 24 hours after ingestion. The second symptom was starting to lose coordination and depth perception, with my mucous membranes drying up. I felt sick, like my stomach didn't want water, despite how dry my mouth felt. I decided it was time to say goodnight to my family and depart. I got into my bed, put some gentle music on, Boards of Canada, and tried to get some sleep. It was about 10:30 p.m. at this point. Slowly did I get sucked into the all-familiar feeling that insomniacs experience, not asleep but neither awake, yet trailing off on distant thought patterns. This continued on as my delirium began to grow over the hours. I felt that I also gained a profound increase in night vision ability. I had to turn the light on a couple of times as I was seeing ants carrying food from my window to the door, or spiders on the window above me. Obviously the Brugmansia was aware of my phobia for insects, but luckily I have worked on these phobias with the assistance of LSD and nature, and was able to tell myself that those weren't real. I believe this was the first test for me. It would have been perhaps 2 a.m. at a guess, when I felt reality and the environment around me dissolve, and suddenly I was at rest. Note, I believed I turned the light off at this stage. I cannot say all of what happened during this time, but I vaguely recall having some vivid dreams until I was suddenly awoken, yet still in a heavy trance. A young lady that I didn't recognize had turned the light on. She felt so familiar, but I gathered that I was also very heavily affected and didn't remember why she had to stay at my place. Even her being a close friend was a possibility in my mind. She asked where she could sleep, so I told her of a fold-out lounge downstairs or a mattress under my brother's bed, She left for a few minutes and returned saying she didn't want to wake the family. She opted to sleep on my double mattress with me. There were no sexual or intimate gestures involved other than when she placed a hand gently on the side of mine, without even making eye contact. Her hand appeared most unusual, but I was in no state of mind to absorb and process such detail. I turned the light off and she appeared to sleep despite me knowing that she was always awake. She moved down a bit in position so we were not facing head to head with each other. The moonlight coming through the window seemed to cast a black and white spell on everything. I believe the girl seemed to have very white skin under the moon, and her clothes were very basic yet still modern. The colors were black with parts of blue in different places. I decided to let her rest and try to get further dreams, which took a while of me tossing and turning. I also believe that showing purity of heart that remained untainted by sexual urges, she was beautiful, was the second test. The next stage was the most blurry. I felt I was constantly going in and out of consciousness into delirious encounters involving talking to friends. Each time I stopped talking to one of them I realized that I firmly could tell myself that this was all an effect of the drug and they weren't real. I knew that if I touched them they would disappear. Whenever this realization occurred, my environment dissolved again, bringing me back to my normal room, with a still unknown girl lying very still next to me. I apologized for rambling delirious rubbish and explained I was heavily under the influence of a substance. What made talking to her feel real was the fact that I had easily recognized that when communicating I was talking using my chest, throat and mouth to propel words, whilst the communications with my friends while streaming felt as if there was literally myself and another person discussing something inside my own brain and perception. I discovered this whilst waking up mid-sentence from a dream and hearing and feeling my voice propel the second part of the sentence, but not the first part. This type of test continued in various ways or forms until perhaps 5:30 a.m. including the infamous cigarette vanishing from hand effect a lot of times. Every time this happened I thought I don't smoke in my own room, where did my cigarette go? I ran out of cigarettes this afternoon. This is not real. I continued reinforcing to myself that these were just illusions from the Brugmansia and my head is not completely lost. I felt like the tests had all finished for now, instead of just random mind-fucking encounters with friends that I had to establish as not real each time, and although I tried to ask her name, the words would not properly form and she gave no answer. I rolled over for a little bit, and when I looked back the face seemed to be covered in a blue facial moisturizing mask thingy instead. She smiled and looked away embarrassed, so I figured she thought I wasn't going to wake up for a while and she was bored. Later reading into her various appearances displayed to me, she liked to use symbols to express that she can be fearless, loving, beautiful, ugly, mysterious and human all at once. I said goodnight for the last time and fell asleep. I woke up half an hour later. I could hear my father's alarm for work ringing. It was approximately 6:45 a.m. and the girl had gone from my room, yet I could see the arrangement of the covers indicating that a second person had indeed slept in the bed. I looked around with little success, felt a bit more sober and back to reality and just figured she had to work and needed a place to crash for that reason. I had a shower, and I saw in the bathroom some strong blue moisturizing stuff that had been used but placed in a different position. All these things told me that a girl had slept in my bed last night. It confused me. I got tested by Brugmansia 2 more times by answering mobile calls from people I knew. Both times I was actually not carrying my mobile or a phone of any description, and quickly became aware of that trick. Though when my friend Josh called I asked about a girl staying at my house, and he told me that when he drove past my house very late a girl was at my front door and he talked to her. Josh broke up before I could ask who she was, and I realized that I was without my phone and Josh would not call at 7 a.m. anyway. I was still obviously affected to some degree but could compose myself at least. I was still determined to find out who this girl was, asking friends and telling them briefly of my story. Convinced utterly that she was not a hallucination, as all my communication with her seemed quite real as opposed to the dream hallucinations. When she touched me, I could actually feel her, whereas the other hallucinations seemed to be like projections sent from my own brain and had no physical basis in my own dream world. It has been about 24+ hours since I consumed the mixture. My pupils are still dilated and I feel much more in tune with natural surroundings, understood a conversation between birds, and being able to listen to my plants. Earlier this afternoon I asked my mother if she saw the person that stayed over last night. I explained I was half asleep and told her to sleep on the sofa bed downstairs. My mother told me that at 3 a.m. she was sleeping on the fold-out herself. I didn't want to wake your family. My mother was also a little spooked by the concept, as all the doors were locked, yet she remembers a light being on in my room around 3 a.m. whereas I remember turning it off, sleeping and getting woken up with the light on. I told her it could have been a crazy dream from the dream mixture I prepared, despite neither of us being fully convinced that it was just a dream. It took me a little bit to sink in. My only basis of reality during that whole experience was centered on coming back to my bed after many of my confusing dreams that I felt forced to prove my strength of mind in. I quickly realized that she was the Brugmansia spirit manifesting as a beautiful young woman to me, except actively testing me to earn her respect by proving myself to her. Honestly, everything else happened as it would in reality whilst I was awake and she was lying next to me. These things included letting the cat out of my room, turning the lights off or going to the toilet and such, returning to find her still there. Unlike with any of the other hallucinations I saw of people I knew. It is in these situations that I believe Kalia gave me assistance by improving the clarity and cognitive functions during dream states. I understand now that she has accepted me as her pupil if I so wish to take that road, but I realize how extremely powerful she is. I feel some strong bond with her, yet I do not know for certain whether I shall return for more lessons. I cannot stress enough how much I am amazed at her caring and protective side. I felt so safe around her without even contemplating that I was lying next to a powerful plant spirit. It was not what I expected, that is for certain. Even if nothing else is certain under the spell of this sly and mysterious entity. Despite how I am now aware that she was not an ordinary human girl, here is how utterly convinced she had me before it clicked. Interesting. Very interesting. I was in a state of mild delirium last night, this morning, induced by Brug flower, and some Kalia leaves, to promote lucid dreaming. With my extremely broken sleep at present, and in my state of talking to people who weren't there, by memory I would say that the physical symptoms aren't worth it in hindsight, but I think I conducted it pretty well. Kind of teaches me how fucked up reality is, like when I have the flu. Anyway, what made this particularly interesting, besides cigarettes and stuff vanishing from my hands, was the fact that a girl lady whom I don't know and didn't talk to, by memory, somehow made it into my bed, and I didn't leave my room at all. I don't know what time it was, who it was, and I'm beginning to think that this person might not actually be real, or perhaps she got freaked out by half sentences spoken out loud to people I was seeing in my dreams. Can anybody shed some light on this person? It was really strange. Edit, it's driving me insane. I need to find out if this person was real or not, as I recall conversing with several different friends who weren't there. Fuck, like I only got a phone call about a bit over an hour ago. As soon as I got off the phone I realized that didn't have a phone in that room or in my possession. Crazy shit. My eyes are supposed to take about 24 hours before vision will come back properly, as everything is more blurred from dilated pupils. Well, my night ended up anything but boring, and I was in my own room by myself the whole night. Journal entry, 18th of January 2006 to 7:01 a.m. Be careful and take great care with her. She'll crush you if you cross her.
After my boyfriend told me about his long ago datura trip and the mystical spiky seed pods, I began my own search for the plant. I did a decent amount of research in the beginning, hardly enough, and after several months of searching finally located a Brugmansia tree. My first test was with half of a large double white flower. I made a test tea out of the flower by steeping the flower in hot water for 30 minutes, straining out the plant material, and adding honey and lemon to taste. I experienced mild and mostly enjoyable effects. I felt light and floaty, I had a lot of energy and my thoughts seemed to be moving all around, for lack of a better description, plus dry mouth. I enjoyed my test tea so much, that I decided to do a larger dose as soon as I could. A few weeks passed before I found another tree, also Brugmansia, but of the yellow/golden and single flower variety. I took about 6 or 7 flowers to experiment with, as well as a few leaves. Although I was reasonably experienced with drugs, regular cannabis smoker, lover of MDMA, pursuer of magic mushrooms and dabbler in acid, not to mention a taste for the opiate family, I really underestimated the power of the moonflower. I can only laugh at my own stupidity now, knowing that I thought it would be fun to drink datura tea on my way to a club. Yikes! My best friend Alex, myself, and 3 other friends were going clubbing that evening. Everyone else in the party was going to get drunk and I thought it would be fun to be delirious. My bestie Alex barely knew what datura was, and like I, was not expecting what happened. That evening, I chose 3 flowers and 2 small leaves for my tea. Way too much, little did I know. It seemed like a reasonably safe dose. One of the flowers was still budding, very green and fresh. I chopped all the plant material up and boiled it for 30 minutes, then let it sit for about an hour. I strained out the flowers, added sugar and lemon juice and ended up with about 8 ounces of tea. Alex picked me up at 8 p.m. and I drank the entire 8 ounces of tea within 10 minutes. The tea was tasty and I felt excited about the experience, expecting something more like acid or mushrooms, silly girl I was. 8:30 p.m., we meet up with our other 3 friends at a coffee shop near their homes so we can all ride down to LA in one car. I am getting higher and higher by the minute. I step out of the car to greet my friends and I feel like I'm 2 feet above the ground. Alex comments that my pupils are huge and I seem very high. I'm stumbling around and having trouble walking. I begin to grow slightly concerned, never having felt this disorientated or strange before on anything. It's not unpleasant, but the unpredictability of it starts to frighten me. Then the dry mouth, oh, the horrible dry mouth. My lips were sticking to my gums and I could barely talk, it was so bad. Alex takes me into a coffee shop to get a glass of water. I stumble in, looking drunker, laughing, and becoming more out of it. We all get in the car and start to drive down to LA. I sip my water, it's not helping and I begin to feel nauseated, but I keep drinking. I think I'm going to vomit and I try to roll down the window but my hand won't seem to work. I feel almost like I'm underwater, and I hear people asking me questions, but when I try to answer a bunch of low mumbled nonsense comes out, and I'm started to get frightened. Then I puke. All over my clothes. Thankfully it was just flower tea and water, but now everyone in the car is upset and worried. Alex keeps asking me if I can go to club and I think I try to say yes at first, but then admit that no, I can't ... and I'm beginning to lose moments of consciousness. Blinking in and out of dream conversations. I'm afraid because I know the people in the car are unhappy, many of them try to comfort me and tell me it's fine, don't worry, etc. But I feel I'm staring with crazy wide eyes and babbling nonsenses. So, Alex, being a good friend, has everyone turn around, although we are nearly in LA, and drive back so he can take care of me. I'm sure I would have been arrested or taken to the hospital had I actually made it to the club or any public place. I don't remember much of the drive back. I mostly remember trying to talk and not being able to speak up and feeling confused and worried. I feel that the trip could have been immensely enjoyable for me, had I done in an appropriate setting, but with a bunch of anxious friends who know nothing about Datura, it was pretty stressful, mostly because everyone seemed quite upset at me. Not that I blame them, I did puke all over and kept trying to answer questions that no one had asked. Anyway, next thing I remember is saying goodbye to our other friends as they got into their own cars and headed down to the club. Alex ushered me into the back seat and told me to sleep. Things got pretty weird from this point on. I'm laying in the back seat while he tries to drive me home, the whole time making phone calls to friends and family trying to figure out if he needs to take me to the hospital or what. I'm totally unaware that he's on the phone because I'm busy having conversations of my own. He later told me I thought I was talking to my boyfriend, and at one point he said I seemed to think I was conversing with the gods. I remember sitting up frantically in the back seat and searching through my purse every few minutes, looking for my cigarettes. He kept telling me to sleep and I would listen for a bit, then get back up. He says that I mumbled to myself the entire drive, that I tried to open the door several times as well. I also remember the uncomfortable bodily pain and whimpering and fear at some points, mostly in the onset of the trip. However, I also remember feeling like a child. Everything was new for the first time. I was curious and easily fascinated. It was frustrating to have no memory though. He would try to talk to me and mid-sentence I would stop and completely forget what was going on. He told me that I kept saying, "Is that a new outfit, Alex? I really like it," over and over, even though he wasn't wearing anything I hadn't seen several times before. At what I believe to be about 10:30 p.m. we arrive back at my house. He pulls me out of the back seat and I can barely walk up to my door. I'm covered in vomit tea and complaining that I'm very cold. He reports that I got very belligerent when he tried to get me to follow him and that at one point I shouted obscenities at him, although I don't recall that part. The next thing I remember is that we are sitting on the bench outside my front door and he's trying to get me to sober up before he takes me inside, which of course is not happening in the least bit. I pretend to read the newspaper, holding it upside down but examining it closely and with interest. He tries to talk to me to see how coherent I am, and I seem to know who he is and who I am, but little else, including the fact that I've had datura. About 11 p.m., he realizes that I am far from sobering up and decides to bite the bullet and take me inside. The lock on my door sticks, so he struggles with my key trying to unlock the door. I remember that he kept asking me how to unlock it and trying to get me to help him. At one point I stood up from the bench to try to unlock the door myself, but fell flat on my back against the cement. Then I started laughing, feeling no pain at all, and climbed back up on the bench. I had a bump on my head the next day and some bruises, but no pain or serious injuries. He finally got the door open and took me in. I kept bumping into furniture, walls, falling over and slurring nonsensical words. I thought I could pass for drunk in front of my family and get to my bed and pass out. I thought I was acting reasonably sober, but apparently that's not what everyone else saw. Stumbling to my bedroom was the last thing I actively remembered that night. I woke up at about 9 a.m., the next morning, in my bed, dressed in different clothing. I'm still not sure who dressed me, apparently I managed to do it in my stupor. I was wearing a t-shirt and biker shorts. I awoke feeling oddly refreshed and awake, but with distorted vision and an odd lightness or confusion about me, but it was not unpleasant at all. Alex called me saying, "Do you even know what happened last night?" and filled me in on some of the missing memories. It was very strange to wake up with amnesia, having never blacked out at all before. Alex reported that I seemed to have gone totally insane and he was worried I was seriously ill. He said that my eyes would get this scary blank look and I could stare right at him and think I was talking to someone or something else. He also complained that I peed in the back seat. Oops. I don't remember that, but knowing more about datura, it doesn't surprise me at all now. Alex told me that once we got into my house he had to explain to my dad what was wrong with me. They tried to hide me from my mom, putting me in my room and saying that I was in there talking to Alex all night. Alex explained what datura was to my father, who had never heard of such a plant, and they looked it up on the internet. After that, Alex left me in my dad's care and went home. Some of the missing memories from that night came back to me, things that I thought were dreams. I remember wandering around the house and opening the fridge door and seeing it full of cans of ice cold Coke. I thought I talked to my mom at one point, but I'm not sure if this was real. My dad said that I looked like an alcoholic going through DTs and that it was really scary, and he said that he had to keep telling me to go back to my room because I would wander out talking to myself in inanimate objects, and I kept moving things around the house. At one point I remember turning on the bathtub and the sink and forgetting about them. I kept taking objects from my bedroom into the bathroom. And the next morning when I opened the bathroom cupboard I found a bunch of my underwear and stockings stuffed in there. I also remember looking at myself in the mirror and laughing manically into my weird blankly dilated eyes and talking to my reflection, not really knowing that it wasn't another person. I'll never forget the look in my eyes. It really didn't seem to be me, but it was my unconscious mind, free through the power of datura, peeking back at me from behind my big black pupils. I guess at some point I must have gotten into bed and truly fell asleep, although I really wish I knew more about what I experienced during my delirium. Sadly, I didn't have my trip set up right. I wish I had had a guide who wanted to watch and help me on my journey, as well as report what I was saying and seeing. Anyway, the next day I went into work just fine, and felt quite good but strange all day. I felt an odd sense of power and excitement, and happiness that I wasn't hurt. I don't believe I was in danger of dying from too much poison, although I do think the dose was too large. However, my delirium presented a strong danger that I could be killed by walking into traffic or in some other unwitting way. I did try to jump out of a moving car without knowing what I was doing. Ultimately, it took me about a week or so to return to normal, although like many others, I don't think I will ever fully return to my pre-datura state. My short-term memory was very impaired for most of the week following my trip and my concentration was shot. I felt very dizzy and worried that I might not fully recover. My mental capacities do seem to have returned for the most part now. My vision returned to normal in about 2 days. After that I have been a freer person than I ever was before. Having struggled with anxiety and depression for years, treating it with Prozac, I feel that truly experiencing that delirious state may have actually helped relax my mind in some way I don't fully understand. I became stronger and far less passive after my trip as well. I was going through a hard time with my boyfriend, and after the trip awoke feeling more in love with him than ever, and the feeling has remained. I became even more obsessed with the goddess Datura after that trip. My dreams are filled with her and are more vivid and real than ever before. Before Datura I did sleepwalk occasionally and talk in my sleep often, but I often felt unable to call out for help in my dreams, having no voice. After doing Datura, I talk in my sleep more than ever, but I am no longer silenced in my dreams. I can even shout out in my dreams now. Sometimes it's harder to distinguish what was a dream and what really happened, as the lines are certainly blurrier. I have since experimented with Datura, Jimson weed in particular, several more times at much lighter doses. I ate 20 seeds, which produced an uncomfortably heavy body, strange illogical fear and some very interesting delusions. The 20 seeds was an alright dose, because I only experienced a moderately delusional effect for a shorter time range. I started getting mumbly and weird about 30 minutes after consuming the seeds, lay down into bed and started going in and out of dreams, had a conversation with my friend Alex, who had moved to San Francisco by then, and kept dropping my imaginary cigarette into the blankets. The after effects almost felt kind of mushroomy to me, in that jerky colorful sort of way. I enjoyed the after effects more than the actual trip, which at the time had that gripping fear. Sometime later I made another tea, this time using 1 flower and 1 leaf. I only drank half the cup before the strange fear and painful body high set in. Then I fell asleep, no hallucinations that I recall that time. However, for now I'm foregoing tea and other consumable methods, as the power is just too profound for my body. Currently, I'm experimenting with my second jar of flying ointment, made from lavender oil, ground datura leaves, flowers and seeds, all boiled in candle wax until frothy, then strained and let to cool. So far I've only rubbed very small amounts of it into my wrists and temples, producing excitement, shaking and that sort of datura weirdness. For now, I only experiment with very small doses of datura. One day I hope to experience full delirium again, with the presence of a guide to help me get the most from my trip and remain safe. I've been doing as much research into every area of this plant as possible. The history, science and mythology are fascinating, and I strongly recommend that everyone research all areas before beginning experimentation. I see a lot of bad talk and fear about datura, but I guess I'm one of the few people who have fallen in love with her. I love the smell, the flowers, the beauty, the power, the intoxication. Her very spirit is the spirit of the dream realm, of the delirious mind, of the untamed brainstem, our primitive thoughts given control of our bodies. As it's been said before, it's not recreational, it's not traditionally fun, it can be painful and frightening, but I do believe if she calls to you, you may not be able to resist. Doing datura, to me, is like being possessed by her. The only advice I have for anyone looking to try it is, respect her, more than you think you should, or she may put the fear in you like you've never known before. Love her and perhaps she'll imbue you with some of her power, treat her poorly and she may kill you. Start at really small doses, work your way up to different levels before you jump in, and never do it alone. You might need help when she takes over.